Awesome. Come right up close. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. And first, thank you, Patsy and Asa, so much for that beautiful opening song. And thanks to all of you for being here today for an important update on the work of this group that's addressing a true crisis that we have here in Washington State and around our country. I'm proud, and it's really an honor to be standing here today with a task force that has made and continues to make a difference and making positive change on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. I think it's fair to say that this group, and you'll be hearing from some key members of that organization here shortly, has made not just an impact here in Washington State, but across this country as well. Its success is even reaching into Canada. So their work has had positive implications already. Today you're going to hear from a number of executive committee members. One you've already heard from, that's Patsy. She'll be speaking after I speak. She'll be followed by Abigail Echohawk, and she'll be followed by State Senator and Task Force member Manka Dhingra. Unfortunately, one of our Task Force members who was going to be here to speak unfortunately had some plane trouble today. She's so disappointed she couldn't be here. We're disappointed she couldn't be here. And that's Puyallup Tribe Councilmember Anna Bean, who of course has played a really critical role in all this work. So we really miss her, but appreciate her strong efforts on this work. And of course, after we hear from our speakers, we're happy to answer any questions that folks may have. Before I touch on some of the key recommendations from the interim report that the task force is issuing today, I do want to acknowledge the important work of my team in the Office of the Attorney General. Policy Analyst Annie Forsman Adams is the MMIWP Task Force Coordinator and member. Also, AGO Tribal Liaison Asa Washins, who you've already heard from, and also Senior Policy and External Affairs Manager Ellen Austin Hall. These three individuals have really played a key role from our office in assisting with the work and participating in the work of the task force. And of course, we would not be here without the contributions and dedication of family and community members who are really at the heart of this important work. Their work and their input into this task force has been invaluable. I also want to recognize Executive Committee member, State Representative Deborah Lekanoff, who also unfortunately could not join us today. She's been a true leader on these efforts, and she took one of the early ideas from this group, which was the idea of MMIWP alerts, and helped pass that through the state legislature this last session, which is another example of the work of this group that's not just making a difference here in Washington State, but we're hearing from other states. I'm hearing from other AGs about that important legislation to see if they can do something similar in their states as well. This group, this task force, helped get that approved and helped get the system up and running. And thanks to those efforts, we recently had our first alert go out just recently. These quick alerts, as you might imagine, can be pivotal to bringing the missing home as soon as possible. But there is more work to be done, and this task force interim report gives 10 recommendations for the path forward to address the systemic issues related to decades of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. The copy of the report is available. We have them here today, and I'm going to focus on my brief remarks on one that impacts the Office of the Attorney General, one of the recommendations from the task force. In these recommendations is a call to create and to fully fund an MMIWP-focused cold case unit in my office. As you might imagine, coordination and resources are essential to bring justice to the many families whose cases have gone cold. And in all too many of these cases, they are cold cases. And cold cases are challenging. They need resources to help solve them and bring justice and accountability and closure for families. And so that is a key recommendation from this task force, is to seek that funding from the state legislature and house that unit in the Office of the Attorney General. I think it goes out saying that is a proposal that I personally strongly support, and our office is excited to get to work on that if the legislature approves it. My office can serve as a central hub, offering help to law enforcement and a resource to families to help solve these cases. They happen all across the state of Washington. It's no one jurisdiction. The issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and people knows no borders, of course. And so to have the state AG's office help to facilitate this work seems logical to me, and we look forward to assisting. The work is far from over. As the report notes, this crisis has been going on for generations, and making the necessary changes to solve it will not be easy and will take time. Let me just add that I also strongly support one of the recommendations that the legislature extend the life of the task force beyond next year. This group has done tremendous work already, and it will be important for the legislature to extend this group so they can continue to address these big challenges. As we've seen, they can accomplish a lot if they're given the time and the tools to do it. So next up is Patsy Whitefoot, who again you heard from earlier and has just been a tremendous leader on this effort, and it's really an honor, Patsy, to have you with us here today. Thank you so much.
As I shared earlier, I shared my greetings. I shared my English name, Patricia Whitefoot, and my Indian name, Twaput. Having been a family member on the state task force this past few months, it has really opened my eyes. When my sister, Daisy Mae Heath, went missing back in October 1987, I felt like I was very alone, along with my sisters as well and family members. And by being with the task force, just the short period that we have been working with one another and communicating with one another, I've opened my eyes to what's involved in all aspects of the reports. And as a family member, I made it a point to have a voice in support of my sister and also my family members who've been murdered. Several family members on the Yakima Indian Reservation, where I live, including the rural remote community of White Swan, where my sisters and I resided, and our lifelong homelands are there in our homestead. In considering this important work, and today as a great-grandmother, I take this work very seriously because I also have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I don't want these children to have to go through what we've been through, although there are continuing issues that are going on in our community, but the work is important. I know that my sister Daisy would ask for nothing more. Her work was about helping to raise our children, the nieces and nephews and the grandchildren. And in her life, she excelled in many ways, both physically and in sports, and was a very independent person. And as I think about all of our women, particularly our women who've been missing and are murdered, I often say a prayer for them, and I thank Asa for offering the prayer today, because that's important and that's what's called for in the report as well. There are additional recommendations that we made as family members, wanting to make certain that we have time for sacred time with one another, whether that be offering a prayer and a song or smudging or what have you. Just be respectful of the ways that we are as Native people, which is what my sister did. And I also made a strong recommendation that we also address the needs of the women who've been unidentified, and in this state we have 2 individuals. And the reason I made that recommendation was because the FBI asked me, the county sheriff asked me, and also the Bellevue State Patrol asked me about these individuals. And I think it's important that we pay attention to these individuals who have not been identified, Parker Doe and Helen Doe, because they do have Native ancestry, and it's important to me that we continue to provide the resources that we can to also solve that. I want to thank you for this opportunity to be here. Thank Attorney General as well for his work and his commitment to this ongoing work. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Abigail Echohawk, a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma and the Executive Vice President of the Seattle Indian Health Board and Director of the Urban Indian Health Institute. In 2018, the Urban Indian Health Institute issued a groundbreaking report that showed that Washington State had some of the highest rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the country. Our women were going missing and being murdered, and nobody was listening. And in fact, Washington State was one of the very first to make efforts to begin to address this crisis. However, those initial efforts were tokenizing and not meaningful. In 2019, my organization issued another report specific to Washington State titled, "We Demand More." We were not willing to take tokenized efforts. We were not willing to have our people suffer in silence. In that report, one of the key recommendations that came from the community was the establishment of a task force. This task force, the one that today is releasing recommendations that came from the community, by those who stand behind me right now and those who stood in front of us to ensure that we had the capacity and the ability to do this report. One that calls for justice. One that recognizes we have too many cold cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in this state. And we need the establishment of this within the Attorney General's office to address these cold cases. Because as a result of the institutional and structural racism within law enforcement, our people were not seeing investigations and our loved ones were dying in silence. It is absolutely essential, as shown in the report, to ensure that those most affected are the ones leading. We have sat in the task force and listened to tears, to grief, to songs, to mourning, to joy, to humor, and to a fierceness coming for our families who have been affected that say our loved ones will not die in silence. We must push for the justice that they so deserve. The report makes the recommendations that it has to be for our families, by our families. And in order to do that, we need to ensure that the Washington State Legislature extends the task force so we have the true opportunity not to do 1 year's work, not to do 2 years' work, but to do the work that undoes more than 500 years of colonialism that has been killing my sisters for decades, for centuries. The stories have to end. And instead, we want one of where my grandchildren's children never have to worry about whether or not they get on the bus safely, where they don't have to worry of when their loved one steps out of the house on whether or not they'll come home. And they don't have to worry when they interact with law enforcement on whether or not they will treat them with dignity, with respect, and ensuring that our loved ones are cared for, regardless of the situations in which they went missing and in which they were murdered. Today, this task force puts forward recommendations that says justice isn't for tomorrow, justice is now, and we will fight for it.
Good afternoon. I'm Manka Tingra, State Senator from the 45th Legislative District, Chair of our Law and Justice Committee, and I sit on the task force. The crisis of missing, murdered Indigenous women and people urgently requires coordination at all levels of government. I really want to thank Abigail and all the work she has done with the reports that she has written, because when Representative Lekanoff and I started to work to put this task force together, I knew that making sure that we were uplifting the community, making sure they had a seat at the table was critical. The other thing we recognized right away is that the collaboration with our Attorney General was key. The minute we suggested and reached out to him to convene this group, he rose to the occasion, and I'm so very thankful for his leadership. This task force and the interim recommendations are a crucial step to make our society more responsive to the needs of victims and families. I am truly honored to be a part of this task force and to be co-chair of the Data and Research Subcommittee. Gender-based violence continues to plague our nation, and our state is no different. Native people face disproportionate rates of violence, including sexual violence. We know that Indigenous people disappear and are murdered at rates higher than any other ethnic group in the United States. However, accurate data on victims is not readily available, so the true extent of the problem is unknown. We know that racial misclassification of victims occurs quite often, So the data on victims is incomplete, and we have a lot of work ahead of us in that regard. The first step is in creating awareness and training around missing, murdered Indigenous women. And I want to thank all our community members who have been doing that hard work of creating awareness for over a decade. This task force builds on their work, and I'm very excited to see the preliminary recommendations from this task force. I look forward to continuing this incredible partnership with all of the stakeholders to make sure we have meaningful change for all of us in our state and nationally. And with that, I want to thank all of you for being here, and we are all open to answering any questions you may have. Yes.
Does anyone want to take that?
Well, I'll just say we were very excited to pass that legislation, and that was the hope, that once we have that alert up and running, it will result in creating that awareness and will create that urgency so that we can have people recovered as soon as possible.
Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Should we come up to the microphone?
Yeah, we should.
In order for that missing persons alert to be effective, we need to know that race and ethnicity is collected correctly by law enforcement. We know that is still a problem, and while we will see some tremendous success when this is fully implemented, unless race and ethnicity is being collected by law enforcement, it won't matter. So the work that we are doing right now, the Urban Indian Health Institute, along with the King County Prosecutor's Office, of course, in King County, we are focusing on collecting race and ethnicity in a way that honors American Indian Alaska Natives, so that when alerts like this are necessary and needed, that we actually have the race and ethnicity in order to utilize this correctly. We need to see efforts like this across Washington State, because otherwise we have an alert and no race and ethnicity that allows us to use it correctly.
Mr. Attorney General, what sort of, she talked about, getting everyone on board around the state. What level of cooperation do you see or do you expect? Have there been interactions with other corners of the state?
Sure. I think what I would say is that, look, changing the way we do business as a state, whether that's local law enforcement, whether that's an AG's office, whoever that is, look, that's an adjustment for some more than others. But Abigail's point's well taken, right? It's not like we snap our fingers and suddenly it's a perfect system. That said, the system is up, it is operational, and I expect as we go forward, it'll continue to improve. And I will also add that, we're committed in my office, I'm committed to this process because we need everybody's buy-in to make it work in the way that we envision and the way that will save lives. One more thing I'll mention is that, and I might have mentioned this earlier, is we're hearing from other states already about this alert system, that I'm confident that in a couple of years, Washington won't be the only state that has an alert system like this. We've had outreach from other states. I've heard from other attorneys general about this issue, where there's interest. It's once you see it happen, it seems so logical, right? In fact, I remember when it first came to my attention, like, well, why aren't we doing this already, right? That was kind of my initial reaction to it, which I think was one that many had. And so, look, on all these recommendations, it all will take some time. It'll need everybody pulling together. But I do believe that, thanks in large part, right, with Abigail, the work of the report that came out in 2019, right, those steps, the family members, the community, essentially rising up and insisting on action being taken by others around the state, I think you're starting to see the results from that significant effort. Other questions? Yes. How much funding are we seeking from legislature? So I will probably defer to my client, our state legislator, but so I'm not sure the exact number has been determined, but and so we don't want to perhaps get ahead of a number, but I'll let the Senator Dinger, do you want to maybe take a shot at any details you want to provide around what it might cost? Yep.
Yes, and the bottom line is, if there are no dollars put behind a proposal, it's meaningless. Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that we actually have a unit that is up and running and able to do the work that it is tasked to do. And this is where, the Attorney General's office has shown over and over again they can do it. We did that with our sexual assault rape kits, making sure the backlog is being tested. And they're, again, taking the lead in making sure that gets done. So we know we can do it when funding is provided, and so I was very excited to see that be the recommendation. So more on that, but it is going to be a priority.
And maybe the only thing I'll add, I'm confident with folks like Senator Dingra, right, who are committed to this. Any budget impact in the budget always takes some effort, but I feel confident with the support of the community, the work of the task force, legislative leaders like Senator Dingra. I feel confident it'll happen. Maybe just a bit more detail. What we'd be talking about are folks who do the investigations, for example. Cold cases, as you might imagine, right? They're labor intensive, they're resource intensive, they are not easy to solve for a reason they're cold cases. My office does not have criminal authority to bring charges, that's your local prosecutors, but we can do that investigative work and bring the results of that to those local prosecutors who also have challenges with resources. So putting the resources in one office, bringing specialized investigators who specialize in these cases, works with the community, works with tribes across the state, we can do that work and bring those to prosecutors across the state. And if we need to, we can be granted the authority to bring prosecutions as well. Thanks for that question.
One more question. Your task force and then the office that you'll eventually form, it's obviously critical that you have people from these communities on those bodies. I'm guessing that's in play in any way?
Do you want to put the task force imagines?
So, this also goes back to the other question you asked. The task force is made up of individuals all across the state. We have representatives from, and I can ask the other task force members to come up and answer as well. We have a very diverse group of task force members. So we're making sure we're hearing everyone's perspectives, making sure we're prioritizing their needs. And, we have law enforcement, we have tribal members, we have individuals who have experts in data and victim identification. So that is one of the main reasons we need the task force to be extended, so that they will continue to play a role, continue to have a voice as that unit is being set up. So the work will continue to unfold, but the more conversations that are being had, the more recommendations will come out.
I have a question. My name is Roxanne White. I'm a Nez Perce, Yakima, Nooksack, and Grovant. My question as a family member and a survivor to the task force and to the Attorney General is, what does the task force plan to do in the future to support grassroots efforts, which have led for decades from Canada to here in Washington State and beyond? When you guys talk about funds, will you guys be making recommendations to support efforts like myself, MMIWP families that are doing the searches, families that are actually doing what law enforcement isn't, going to look for our own relatives, going to homeless encampments, hills, rivers, all the work that we do? Is the task force going to include us and make sure that they make recommendations for funding and grant opportunities for us as well, and to decolonize that system? Because here we should have had a room full of families. I urge and beg this task force to make more of an effort to notify community when there's a gathering like this. I got this message 3 days ago during a heat wave, and I live downtown, so I almost feel very bad that a lot of families are not here, and I want to apologize to them publicly that I stand here and they're not beside me, but I am grateful for the families that are here, and I want to lift my hands up to them, and I want to thank you all for giving me the invitation. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, everybody. I'm the I'm Annie Forsman Adams. I'm the MMIWP policy analyst. We are going to continue to increase our outreach and to increase our family voices on the task force. We're going to continue to work with stakeholders and to find ways to make the task force more accessible. We currently host family talking circles as well as MMIWP family subcommittee meetings. The families are more than welcome to join at any time. But now that we have gotten our feet underneath us, we will be working very hard with the communities to increase that outreach and to keep this work moving forward. Thank you.
And I'll just add, with the recommendation to extend the task force, that is where we will have the space to come up with a lot more recommendations that are brought forward by the community. And so that's why one of the reasons why it's very important to make sure we extend the task force so that more of those voices can be heard and more recommendations can be made.
Yes.
The report identifies 113 unsolved cases involving Indigenous people. Given what Abigail was saying about data misclassification going back such a long time, do you expect that number to increase? And if so, what efforts are underway to look at that number and try to go back and look at data that may have been misclassified?
So we do expect, given the issues with racial misclassification, data collection, reporting, and other social and cultural barriers, we do expect that it is a misrepresentation of the number. Whether it will go up or go down, we're not going to be able to tell until we have the resources to be able to really look at that data, and that takes a long time. That takes a high level of expertise, and we'll really need to be able to get into that data before we can understand what those numbers really look like.
And I'll just add, getting data on victims has been a challenge for a very long time. Last session, Senator Trudeau and I had a bill on doing interagency criminal justice data collaboration with Department of Health and other agencies so we can get a better understanding of data and how we're taking a look at it. The federal government has actually made grants available for the state to start doing this work. And I am very hopeful that Washington will be able to apply for those grants and really start taking a look more at how we integrate data between our criminal justice system, our Department of Health, our coroner's office, and to give us a much bigger, better picture of what is going on in our state and much more mechanisms for identifying individuals. A large challenge is the fact that when you have these law enforcement databases, they simply don't even have boxes where someone can be appropriately identified. When you box Asian, it's very challenging to figure out who looks like an Asian. It's very challenging to see who looks like Hispanic. You can't do that on visual identification. So it is a huge challenge, but I know that as a state, there are many of us very committed on making sure that we are able to appropriately classify victims in our state.
My organization, the Urban Indian Health Institute, has partnered with King County Prosecutor's Office to do exactly what the Senator was just talking about, changing their database systems to ensure they have the right fields located within there in order to collect race and ethnicity correctly. We have not only partnered with them, we have completely reformed their databases to ensure that they are able to collect race and ethnicity for American Indians and Alaska Natives. We have also trained their staff and will continue to train their staff. We've done this as a pilot project because this is the first time in the nation this has been done, and it's being done in King County right now. And it is through the advocacy of the prosecutor, Dan Satterberg, and our dear friend and task force member, Obney Burns, who's sitting right over there, who really made this happen. We not only had their cooperation, we had their full buy-in to do this, and we're going to continue to work and train and use what's happening in King County not only as a model for Washington State, but a model for the nation. One of the things we have to recognize while we talk about MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, that comes from a cultural perspective of looking at our life bearers and recognizing that they hold such an important part within our communities. But we also have to talk about that we have many of our other folks, particularly our men, our LGBTQ+, two-spirited communities, who are also going missing and murdered at very high numbers, and I don't want to lose them in the conversation related to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And the way to do that is to ensure that we are collecting the data. And when I talk about the data, well, it is so key so we understand the scope of the problem. It is just the beginning. It is through that data that the grassroots advocates, that the policymakers can make meaningful change. We could have all the data in the world, but until somebody does something about it, it's going to be meaningless.
And just a quick final thought, and by the way, I think folks are available afterwards to answer questions if you have them one-on-one. This is an interim report. I hope I was clear on that. I think that's clear in the release. The final report, I believe, is coming out in June. And so one reason you're seeing these interim recommendations now is because there's a legislative session that's about to begin. So I think it's fair to say the task force not want to wait another 10 months before getting recommendations out, like creating of a cold case, because it has to go through a legislative process. Then folks need to be hired. That's a time-consuming process. So the task force is anxious to get these initial recommendations out the door right now so the legislation can go to work on some of them. But you will see a final report in about 10 months, in addition to hopefully seeing the task force continue beyond that. Thank you all so much for being here. We just so appreciate it. Thanks to all the folks who attended as well, and to our speakers who did such a lovely job. And I believe, Danita, we have you here to do a final closing prayer or song. Is that right? Thank you so much, Danita. Glad you could make it. Thank you so much.
I wanted to first take a moment to thank the Office of Bob Ferguson for allowing us to close out this in a good way. So I'll raise my hands up to you. We're going to sing a song, a prayer song, on the traditional ceded lands of the Suquamish people, the Soquamish people. We are here to share healing words and prayers for all of those that are affected by this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and men. My name is Danita Holmes, Suquamish Tribal Member, Suquamish Council Treasurer, and sister to my youngest sister, Jessica Lynn Santos, who went missing in spring 2017 at 24 years old and was laid to rest. I am here with my husband, Joey Holmes, my eldest son, Joseph Holmes Jr., and to my right, my aunt, Barb Santos. We will be singing a prayer song. It's called Returning Home by James Old Coyote Tomaktos.
Oh
beautiful closing to the event. Thank you so much. And appreciate you all being here. We look forward to answering additional questions you have. Have a great day, everybody.